Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. Starting from this video, I'll be going into the stages of cellular respiration. All organisms conduct cellular respiration in order to convert the food they eat into a usable form of energy known as ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. I want to emphasize the part where I said all organisms. Both plants and animals respire because both need to have energy to carry out metabolic processes that are essential for life, such as growth or reproduction. Cellular respiration is a process that consists of multiple steps, so energy is not released all at once, but rather in a multitude of steps that are sped up by enzymes. Here are the different stages of cellular respiration: glycolysis, pyruvate oxidation, the Krebs cycle, oxidative phosphorylation, which is composed of the electron transport chain. I kind of misnamed that in the slideshow. It should be electron transport chain, not electron chain transport. But yeah, the ETC and chemiosmosis. The balanced chemical equation that goes on throughout these steps is C6H12O6, which is glucose, plus 6 oxygens, and that gives you 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 water molecules plus ATP. The first of these processes is called glycolysis. Glycolysis is basically the breakdown of glucose. The word glycolysis can be broken down into glyco, meaning sugar, and lysis, meaning breaking down. If you need help remembering this, think of the word lysosome. The lysosome is an organelle that breaks down waste, it's an organelle that breaks down waste. So the word lysis means break down. Or you could also think of hydrolysis, which is the breaking down of molecules using water. Glycolysis occurs in the cytosol, which is the component of the cytoplasm that's just the intracellular fluid, and it does not include any organelles. This makes a lot of sense from an evolutionary perspective because the very first organisms to inhabit Earth were prokaryotes, which are unicellular organisms that don't have any specialized organelles. Glycolysis is a part of cellular respiration that produces ATP but doesn't occur in any certain organelle, just in the cytosol. So prokaryotes were able to conduct glycolysis and still make a usable form of energy, even if they didn't have specialized organelles. Furthermore, glycolysis is the step of cellular respiration that doesn't require oxygen, or basically it's also called anaerobic. When the Earth was first formed, there was no free oxygen in the atmosphere. But since glycolysis is anaerobic, this condition doesn't hinder glycolysis from occurring. And this makes glycolysis a very ancient process, but one that's utilized by all organisms. Glycolysis itself is composed of 10 steps in total. The first half, steps 1 through 5, are, as written in the slide, the energy requiring steps, or the energy investment steps, where glycolysis is split into 2 3-carbon compounds. And these 3-carbon compounds have a lot of names, but the one that I usually hear is phosphoglyceraldehyde, or shortly known as PGAL. It's also referred to as like G3P or GAP, but you really don't need to worry about that if you're like taking a Regents class. Just know that it splits into 2 3-carbon compounds. As aforementioned, the first 5 steps require energy, meaning that they are endergonic. So even though the point of cellular respiration is to generate ATP, ATP is used along the way. Now this might raise the question of which one came first. Like, how was cellular respiration performed the first time? Or how was ATP generated the first time? That's kind of like the chicken or the egg question, and it's not one you need to know for a school test, but I believe the answer lies somewhere along the evolutionary web of all organisms. Though I don't really think or know if it's been answered, but it is a cool thing to look into. Anyways, back to the main point. Glucose is obviously more than just 6 carbons, since its chemical formula is C6H12O6, but I just wanted to focus on the carbon backbone here on the slide because that's the main part that changes. So the 6 carbons split into 3 each, and as indicated by the P attached to both 3 carbon compounds, there's also a phosphate group that gets transferred to each PGAL each phosphoglyceraldehyde from the dephosphorylation of ATP into ADP. These terms might be a little confusing, but basically the ATPs each lose one of their 3 phosphate groups and turn into ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. So triphosphate becomes diphosphate. The phosphate groups that are detached from their ATPs get reattached to the new 3 carbon compounds formed by the splitting of glucose. That's why they're called phosphoglyceraldehyde. The phosphate has been added. The second half of glucose is when the 2 PGALs that are formed in the first half are configured into a differently structured 3 carbon compound called pyruvate or pyruvic acid. This part is what some would refer to as the energy payoff phase, or the exergonic phase, meaning that energy is being released here. Therefore, when one PGAL is being converted into one pyruvate, 2 ADP molecules are phosphorylated to make 2 ATP molecules. In short, the addition of a phosphate group, which is the process of phosphorylation, to each ADP releases energy and creates ATP. NADH is also being created, and NADH is a high energy molecule, a carrier of electrons that's crucial for the electron transport chain, which, as aforementioned, is one of the later stages of cellular respiration. It's also known as a coenzyme, a molecule that facilitates the functioning of other enzymes in this process. When one PGAL is configured into pyruvate, one NADH is produced by the reduction of NAD+, meaning that an electron is added to NAD+ to make NADH, right? So like reduction is when you gain electrons, oxidation is when you lose electrons. And speaking of reduction, cellular respiration consists of a multitude of redox reactions, right, where electrons are gained or lost and energy is transferred, such as when NAD+ is reduced. But I digress because you don't really need to know the gritty details of all the redox reactions unless you plan on taking AP Bio. It's just important to note that during cellular respiration, there's a lot of energy being transferred, mainly in the form of electron carriers and ATP. But to sum up the second half of glycolysis, each PGAL that are formed in the first half are converted to one pyruvate, and each of this mechanism involves the phosphorylation of 2 ADP into 2 ATP, as well as the reduction of one NAD+ into one NADH. Keep in mind that 1 mole of glucose splits into 2 PGALs, so at the end of the second half, you have produced 4 ATP and 2 NADH in total. All right, here's a very surface level overview of what I talked through before. At the start of glycolysis, you're using 1 mole of glucose and 2 ATPs. Since you're using ATP, this part is endergonic. With this energy, the glucose is split into 2 PGALs, and the 2 ATP have been dephosphorylated into 2 ADP. Then, during the second half of glycolysis, the 2 PGAL will turn into 2 pyruvate, and throughout this process, a total of 4 ADP and 4 phosphate groups will be conjoined to form 4 ATP, and a total of 2 NAD+ will be reduced to form 2 NADH. Ultimately, the net yield of glycolysis for each mole of glucose is 2 pyruvate, 2 ATP, and 2 NADH. I said 2 ATP instead of 4 ATP because remember that 2 ATP were used in the beginning of glycolysis to split glucose. The net yield is when you take into account all the quote-unquote expenses associated with the process, so kind of like the profit. And keep in mind that the NADH that is produced will be used in the electron transport chain later on to generate more ATP, since they are electron carriers. Okay guys, that concludes the presentation for glycolysis. Cellular respiration itself is a very complicated process, so leave any comments down below if you have any questions. Also, if you want, you can shoot me an email if you want to talk more about this topic personally. My email can be found in my bio, but I will include it in the description below. All these presentations and notes can be found on my website, so make sure to check those out if you would like a hard copy of study materials. I will also include the link to the website in the description below, and it can also be found in my bio. This was quite a long video, but if you got this far, thank you so much for watching and being patient with me. It would be much appreciated if you could also like and subscribe, since it would help my channel grow and reach other people who may be interested or need help. Thank you and have a great week.